Japan has revoked South Korea from its list of trusted trading partners on August 28th. Seoul has once again expressed deep regret.
그간 우리 정부는 대법원의 강제징용 판결과 관련해서 일본이 취한 경제 보복 조치를 철회할 것을 지속적으로 요구했습니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 일본은 오늘부로 우리를 백색 국가에서 제외하는 조치를 시행했습니다. 정부는 일본의 이번 조치에 강한 유감을 표명합니다.
The move is deemed to be Japan's second form of retaliation against South Korea following the export curbs on 3 key tech materials for semiconductors. Japanese exporters are now required to draw approval from the government every time they ship out products to South Korea. When Seoul was on Tokyo's whitelist, firms were exempt from requesting export approval for 3 years. Since its whitelist revision has taken effect, Japan hasn't imposed additional retaliatory measures against South Korea. But despite Tokyo's reserved stance, the bilateral tensions aren't showing any signs of mitigation.
Hello, welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Daniel Che. Japan imposed various retaliatory trade measures against South Korea, including removing the country from its whitelist. Seoul responded by terminating the GSOMIA intel sharing pact with Japan. These moves are expected to affect trilateral alliance between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, which is why we have experts from the 3 countries joining us to share with us their insights on the matter. So, let's get to the point. To help us dissect today's subject into digestible bites, we're joined by Dr. Woo Jung-yeop, Research Fellow at Sejong Institute. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, first of all, the whitelist revision by Japan, it's effective. What are the immediate impact or changes we can expect from here on?
So Japanese government has removed South Korea from their white list of preferred trading partners. That means that we have to go through more steps to import things from Japan, but it does not mean that removed from the white list actually put bans on the exporting goods from Japan to Korea. So unless Japanese government try to extend the period of approval or they intentionally delay the process of approval, there would be no immediate impact for the Korean firms. However, if Japanese government decide to put some regulations on Japanese firms and requiring more documents, and if they say more time is necessary, then if South Korean government urgently need some kind of materials from Japan, it's going to harm Korean firms in that regard.
Right. We have a chart showing the changes in guidelines for the Japanese imports after the whitelist removal. How difficult is it for Korean firms to import Japanese materials with these changes implemented?
So before the revision from Japanese side, the 27 countries, including South Korea, was in the whitelist. That means that those countries could acquire like 3-year comprehensive approval from Japanese government. That means that the firms who need imports from Japanese government does not need to get like individual license or permit every time they need. But since Korea is being removed from the whitelist, that means that now we don't get 3-year approval benefits. Now we have to go through case by case to get the permission. And also, Japanese government can delay the period of approval as long as 90 days compared to about a week if you are included in the whitelist. So that means that it does not mean the banning the importing or exporting Japanese goods and materials to South Korea, but it added more steps for companies to acquire those permissions and approvals from the Japanese government.
Right, with this measure, it looks like the Japanese government will have an easier time making it more difficult for South Korean companies and those involved in trade. Any possibilities of Tokyo imposing additional retaliatory measures on top of the whitelist removal?
So if South Korean government has not decided to not extend the GSOMIA, then there might be a chance that Japanese government would do something else. However, as South Korean government decided not to extend the GSOMIA with Japan, now one of the important player here, the United States, has some negative thinking of Korean government decision. So I think Japanese government does not have to do anything more negative to negatively impact South Korea. So I think for the time being that Japanese government would not escalate in their policies, but their rhetoric can continue.
So what can the South Korean government do to better protect the industries that's affected by these trade measures?
So far, no Korean firms has reported any damages yet by implementation of being removed from the whitelist of Japanese government. But South Korean government has cabinet meeting administered by Prime Minister on 28th that they are going to help those firms who indeed have like damages or hurts by Japanese implementation of their trading restrictions. If any Korean firms was damaged by the delayed process of Japanese approval of exporting materials to Korean firms, the South Korean government can give some like tax benefits or the funds to alleviate their hurts. And in the long run, the South Korean government is trying to help R&D businesses so we can develop our own materials to replace our dependence on Japanese materials.
Various efforts are ongoing as we speak. Now, GSOMIA is an issue that's as important as the whitelist. Here's a clip on how South Korea decided to pull out from the military intel sharing pact with Japan.
South Korea has declared to terminate GSOMIA with Japan on August 22nd amid heightening bilateral tension triggered by Tokyo's export restrictions.
정부는 안보상 민감한 군사정보 교류를 목적으로 체결한 협정을 지속하는 것이 우리의 국익에 부합하지 않는다고 판단하였습니다.
Terminated for the first time in 3 years since signed in November 2016, GSOMIA allows South Korea and Japan to share sensitive military information. Tokyo could not cloak its bafflement and expressed deep regret with Seoul's decision.
日韓請求権協定に違反するなど国と国とのですね信頼関係を損なう対応がですね残念ながら続いている。
South Korea, meanwhile, has stressed that Japan has continuously been ignoring its request to mend the situation.
일본 측의 대응은 단순한 거부를 넘어 우리 국가적 자존심까지 훼손할 정도의 무시로 일관했고 외교적 결례를 범했습니다.
As the bilateral conflict shares indirect links with their neighboring countries like North Korea and the US, it is to be seen how South Korea's GSOMIA exit would affect the regional stability.
So the pact will no longer be effective as of the end of November. A few anticipated such an outcome. What are some of the key reasons for this decision?
So not many actually anticipated that South Korean government decided not to extend the GSOMIA with Japan. The reason was that there was intelligence gains that South Korean government needs, and also there is the demand from the U.S. government to keep the GSOMIA intact. However, the reason why South Korean government decided not to extend the GSOMIA with Japan is the reason that Japanese government used when they removed South Korea from the whitelist. So it is obvious that Japan decided to remove South Korea from the whitelist because of their dissatisfaction with the Supreme Court decision in South Korea about the forced labor during the Japanese colonization period. However, Japanese government could not use their dissatisfaction in the history issue for the removing South Korea from the whitelist. For that reason, Japanese government used security reason for removing South Korea from whitelist. Now the logic is like that when Japanese government cannot trust South Korea, so they remove South Korea from the whitelist, then how can we share our important intelligence with the Japanese government, who explicitly mentioned that they cannot trust South Korea in terms of the security. So South Korean government decision was that it was started by the Japanese government because they say South Korea was not trustworthy in terms of security. And South Korean government has tried to reconcile the differences with the Japanese government since the summer this year. However, Japanese government has not sincerely responded to South Korean government efforts. So that was the reason why South Korean government decided not to extend the GSOMIA with Japan any longer.
Without this intel sharing pact, what happens to security coordination between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan from here on?
So even without GSOMIA, there is a way that South Korean government can share the intelligence with the Japanese government. Back in the history, that South Korean government and the Japanese government tried to have GSOMIA in 2010. However, there is a public opposition of that kind of move in South Korea. So South Korean government could not proceed with signing GSOMIA with Japan. So there's a need for the sharing intelligence between Korea and Japan. U.S. was intervening at that time. So there was a trilateral information sharing agreement between U.S., Korea, and Japan. So now Japan and Korea can share the intelligence via U.S. So it has to go through one more step, like it has to go through the United States. So to have more like real-time intelligence sharing, the U.S. Demanded Korea and Japan to sign the GSOMIA. So in 2016, the Japanese government and South Korean government signed the GSOMIA. So even without GSOMIA, it's not as convenient as GSOMIA, but we can still share the information through TISA.
Right. TISA is the intel sharing agreement similar to GSOMIA, but can it serve as a substitute properly for GSOMIA?
The reason why we have signed the GSOMIA on 2016 when we already have TISA on 2014 means that GSOMIA has added values. So there's always more is better in intelligence. That is why we have signed the GSOMIA in 2016 when we already have TISA in 2014. So TISA can compensate lack of information sharing by terminating GSOMIA, but maybe the more is the better can be used in this case.
Right, Dr. Wu, we're going to put you on pause for a while because we'll be connecting with experts from outside of Korea for now. So let's connect via Skype with an expert in Japan this time to find out how the locals feel about the move. Stephen R. Nagy, professor of politics and international studies from International Christian University, is with us. Hello, Professor.
All right. Greetings from Tokyo. It's great to be here again to talk about this important issue.
Great to have you back with us. What is Japan's reaction to South Korea's GSOMIA withdrawal?
Well, I think initially the reaction by the Japanese to South Korea's decision to withdraw from the GSOMIA agreement has been one of bewilderment. First and foremost, from the Japanese point of view, they see that this agreement is not an agreement between Japan and South Korea directly. It's an agreement through the United States. And any intelligence that would have been shared through the United States. So the Japanese view this as handicapping not only Japan's ability to deal with some of the regional security issues, such as North Korea, and more assertive behavior by the Chinese in the East China Sea and the South China Sea and other areas, but it also handicaps the South Koreans' ability to cooperate with the United States and Japan. Second, and I think importantly, from the Japanese point of view, it sends a very strong signal that the South Korean government prioritizes, in many ways, getting back at the Japanese for the restrictions on and slowing of certain exports into South Korea over the U.S.-South Korea alliance. And I think this is a bit of a shock for policymakers here in Japan, because the U.S.-South Korea alliance really is the bedrock. It's the cornerstone of South Korean security on the peninsula. And it's even more important today as we see North Korea continue to test short-range missiles within the region and really push the limits of missile development, but also clandestine nuclear development.
terminating the pact, are there benefits or drawbacks for the two countries with these decisions?
So I think the termination of the GSOMIA agreement is very significant in terms of demonstrating how bad or how eroded South Korea-Japan relations are at this stage. We've had first an accidental or a locking on of South Korean missile technologies back in January 2019. We've had the Comfort Women Agreement reneged upon. And we also have, this issue with trade between the two states. Now, withdrawing from the GSOMIA agreement is really, it feels like the final nail in the coffin in terms of South Korea and Japan relations. That important institution that allowed them to exchange important information, which is part of building trust. And again, at this stage, I think both sides are not in a stage of engaging in behavior that is built on trust. And this is unfortunate for both South Korea and Japan because they are needed partners in the region. And they are, in some ways, such natural partners. They're both liberal democratic societies. They share many of the same security threats. And I think that many of the core values of both South Koreans and Japanese, although in the media, there's often they talk about the differences. I think that many of the core values of citizens in both countries are very similar. They're focusing on peace, they're focusing on prosperity, they're focusing on the communities and managing the challenges of everyday life. And I think that we should move back to this basis for building positive relations.
Thank you, Professor Nagi, for your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Seoul's GSOMIA decision drew Washington's attention. Let's find out what some American top officials had to say about this move.
We're going to see what happens. President Moon, also a very good friend of mine, and we'll see what happens with South Korea.
We're disappointed to see the decision that the South Koreans made about that information sharing agreement. We were urging each of the two countries to continue to engage, to continue to have dialogue.
So as opposed to Trump, who seemed to remain passive about the GSOMIA pullout, his Secretary of State expressed disappointment to Seoul's top diplomat about the move.
So the response from the U.S. was much more stronger than South Korean media has anticipated. So now there's a concerns raised within Korea and within United States that whether the South Korean government decision not to extend the GSOMIA negatively impact the alliance. So it has negative element because U.S. government has demanded the South Korean government to keep the GSOMIA as is, and South Korean government indeed refused the U.S. demand. So even though it was Korea-Japan bilateral issue, now it becomes trilateral issue, including the United States. That is why U.S. has this kind of negative responses for the South Korean government decision. So for the time being that we have some issues between Korea and the U.S., but we have 65 years long alliance, and there are many ups and downs in the past. So I think we have to talk more with the United States to get over this kind of differences.
Initial response by President Donald Trump seemed more collected and cool about it. What do you make of that?
So, it was more of working level issues than presidential issues. So managing alliance is very important for the working level government officials, but the GSOMIA is not the presidential issues, and President himself might think that it was not really helping in the future if we make harsh comment on South Korean government decision.
Let's hear straight from an expert from the U.S. for their take on the situation. Now, time now to find out how America is interpreting South Korea's move. We have an expert from Washington joining us via Skype. David Maxwell, Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, is here to share his views. Hi there.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here with us. What is the United States' reaction to the GSOMIA withdrawal by South Korea?
Well, I think we've heard reactions from the State Department and the Department of Defense. Secretary Pompeo expressed his disappointment. Spokesman for the State Department and for the Department of Defense have said that they are concerned, and this definitely is harmful to the national security of not only South Korea, but also South Korea, the United States, and Japan. So the reaction has been one of surprise, disappointment, and concern. And of course, this is going to have impacts on South Korean national security, on intelligence sharing among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. And then it's going to impact other things, such as burden sharing, negotiations, and things like that. And of course, the big concern of all is that this actually supports Kim Jong-un and China and Russia, because it really upends the U.S., both U.S. bilateral alliances, and really the trilateral cooperation that is necessary for success on the Korean Peninsula. And lastly, there are those who question whether South Korea thinks that North Korea is the greater enemy. And there are some that think that Koreans think that Japan is the greater enemy than North Korea. And that is very troubling to Americans.
Would Seoul's latest move have any significant impact on South Korea-U.S. alliance?
Yes. First of all, as I mentioned, it's going to hinder intelligence sharing. And all three countries have different capabilities, overlapping complementary capabilities in intelligence. And the sharing of information really improves the security of all three countries, either filling gaps or providing second source confirmation of information. And if we return to the system where Japan and Korea provide information through the United States, it slows the process, and it puts both countries at greater risk. And so that is one area. Also, this is going to impact on burden sharing. There are those in the United States that think South Korea is more concerned with domestic politics and historical wrongs than its own national security. So some U.S. negotiators may press hard for South Korea to provide the $5 billion demand that was made by Ambassador Bolton. And because the U.S. thinks that South Korea must pay more for U.S. support, since South Korea is not placing its own defense as a priority.
Seoul-Tokyo tensions are escalating in fields of economy and regional security as well. How would you advise the two sides resolve the dispute?
Well, it's really only going to be resolved by two people, President Moon and Prime Minister Abe. Both of them are going to have to exercise real leadership, real political leadership. Both of them will have to put their national security and their national prosperity first over domestic politics. But both are reacting to their domestic political constituencies, and that is really putting both countries at risk. The only way for something to change is for both the president and prime minister to step back from this and say, we need to resolve this. We need to face the common enemy of North Korea, and we need to place our national security and prosperity first. And the United States is willing to react positively to that kind of move. I fear, though, that both leaders do not have the political capital or the political courage to take those steps. But really, that is the only way that it's going to be resolved.
David, we appreciate your time and expertise on this matter. Thank you so much.
All right.
Now, back to you, Dr. Wu. Here's the last question before we let you go. The bilateral conflict, it's expanding to various domains. Your suggestions on finding a way to take steps to turn things around?
So, like the bilateral issues between Korea and Japan has been always difficult, and now it became much more difficult than before. So I think that first and foremost, the two countries have to agree that they would not escalate any more than this, because that without escalation, we can find some time to find the common ground to reconcile the differences. However, if two countries continue to escalate because of their domestic situations, it's going to be much more difficult in the future to solve this. And second, it's not just a bilateral issue between Korea and Japan. Now it becomes like trilateral issues in Northeast Asia, which involves the United States. So we have to keep in mind that now this is not only the issue between two countries, but also we have to consider the element of the United States in this equation.
Dr. Woo Jung-il, we appreciate you coming in and making our program complete today.
Thank you.
Despite hopes for a breakthrough, no positive turnaround in the Seoul-Tokyo trade dispute. For the updates on these developments, let's roll the clip.
President Moon Jae-in said Japan needs to be honest, coming out hard against the Japanese government's efforts to link historical issues to economic matters, calling such an attitude disingenuous.
일본은 정직해야 합니다. 일본 정부가 어떤 이유로 변명하든 과거사 문제를 경제 문제와 연계시킨 것이 분명한데도 대단히 솔직하지 못한 태도라 하지 않을 수 없습니다.
Speaking during a cabinet meeting Thursday to review the government's budget plan for next year, President Moon said the attitude of the Japanese government towards historical issues has never been honest, and its reluctance to either acknowledge or repent for its wrongdoings only aggravates the wounds of the victims.
과거를 기억하고 성찰한다는 것은 끝이 없는 일입니다. 한 번 반성을 말했으니 반성은 끝났다거나 한 번 합의했으니 과거는 모두 지나갔다는 식으로 끝낼 수 있는 일이 아닙니다.
The president sent a clear warning to Japan, even saying it should take lessons from Germany that earned the trust of the international community through its acceptance and sorrow for its past.
To secure national interests, South Korea must fully utilize its diplomatic ability, and the government must make wise, careful decisions that the Korean public can get behind. That's all we have for you at this hour. For more, do tune in again, same time next week for a brand new episode of The Point. Thank you for watching.